26. The factory had been abandoned many years ago. Nobody made anything anymore, especially out here. One wall was missing entirely, the roof was scorched and the concrete blackened. The remains of a chain-link fence lay on the ground, hidden amongst the weeds that had cracked the street. The row of houses were further along. They had once been cared for, but now the small gardens were overgrown, the paintwork peeling and tiles were missing from the roof. Some had boarded up windows, others had no windows at all. A plant, a creeper of some kind, rose up to one of these gaps, disappearing inside like a finger rising from the soil and invading the mouth of the house, ready to pull it down. And Rodin knew that, eventually, this was exactly what would happen. These houses had been made to withstand the elements. They were a fortress from nature standing proud. But now nature was clawing her way back. Eventually, the walls would collapse. The concrete and brick would become stones on the ground and plants would take over once more. Everything returned to its origins sooner or later. The house at the end of the row was the only one with windows intact. It looked shabby, but there were signs of life. A path had been beaten to the door, mud showing through the flattened plants. There were curtains across the downstairs windows, but the upstairs ones were open. Rodin carried on past, then went round to the back. The rear fence was high but fallen in places, giving easy access. The curtains were open, and Rodin caught signs of movement through a door through to the front room. He inspected the wall at the side of the house, and looked up to a window. The crumbling masonry would provide adequate handholds. He was at the window in a few minutes, one hand grasping the overhang of the roof while the other used a tool to lift the latch. There were no alarms and no obvious security. He lifted the window and slid through, finding himself in what had once been a bedroom. Now it was storage boxes lining the walls. He made for the door and tested the handle. Locked. Not a problem. His lock picks made short work of it, and he eased the door open, revealing a small landing and 3 other rooms with doors all open. 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. Towels and bed linen, a bar of soap at the sink. He made for the stairs, listening intently. Voices came from below, talking quietly. He could only make out 2, but there was a chance someone was keeping quiet. Rodin moved slowly, testing each step. Whenever he heard the first inkling of a creak, he adjusted his weight, shifting his foot to another spot, keeping to the edges as much as possible. At times he missed steps altogether. He reached the small hallway, the front door ahead, and a door off to one side, the front room where the voices came from. He listened at the door, hearing the conversation quite clearly. Its content didn't interest him, but he heard the 2 of them call each other by name. 2 names he hoped he'd hear. Sharoff and Ratch. He'd found his target. They might have weapons either on hand or within reach. They sounded relaxed, but Rodin didn't know how quickly they'd react to his presence. They'd be scared, and while fear numbed some into inaction, it made others impulsive. He didn't have a clear plan. But he had training and experience. He reached for the door. It was slightly ajar, and he placed his hand on it, increasing the pressure. It was a little stiff, so likely to creak. If he went slowly, they would be alerted. Best to go for the sudden approach. He shoved the door back and stepped through, a blade in one hand, his lance in the other. The 2 men were seated, one on a chair by the window, the other on a battered sofa against the wall. They both looked up and stiffened when he entered, but neither moved. Rodin took the room in. A threadbare rug, a sofa and a chair both covered with throws, a small table between the 2, a couple of steaming mugs. Food prep area to one side, gas cooker, he could see the canister, the tube connecting it. Little clutter. Beyond this, the back door. Battery-operated lanterns hung from the ceiling. His presence had moved the air and they swung.
Who are you?
The man on the sofa asked, his voice wavering. He had moved his feet, placing them firmly on the ground, his hands on his knees. Possibly ready to rise but unsure. Just happened to be passing. Rodin didn't want small talk. But he felt a reluctance to act. He positioned himself between the food prep area and the door. Unless they went through the front window, they would have to get past him to escape. And that wasn't going to happen.
Who sent you?
This was the man in the chair. Rodin noticed the blonde hair tied back. "Who do you think, Ratch?" he said, and saw the man bristle at the mention of his name. There was fear, and Ratch grabbed the arms of the chair with some force. But he held Rodin's gaze, and was clearly summoning up his strength. His mouth moved a few times, and eventually he mustered the words he wanted to speak.
Before you do whatever you have to, can I talk? I'm not going to plead, but I want to explain.
A strong character. Accepting the inevitable, Ratch was indeed not pleading. The word please was so often the first Rodin heard, especially after realization struck. But Ratch had not said that word. Rodin nodded, holding the blade up. Ratch swallowed before speaking again.
I know what this is about. That poor girl. But I knew nothing of her condition. She never told me. If I'd known, I would never have sent her after more clients. I would have told her to take it easy, to have a break. I have a fund I keep to one side for emergencies. I would have offered to pay for treatment. Whatever her father thinks, I did not have a hand in her death.
I know. Surprise showed on Ratch's face, morphing into something like hope. His mouth twitched, the corners turning up. Then his gaze dipped to Rodin's hands, to the weapons he held. With a sigh he slumped.
But you're going to remove me anyway.
I have a job to do. There was movement from the sofa.
That's it? Just doing your job?
Sharoff looked angry, leaning forward, his voice raised.
You've come in here ready to kill my friend and you know he's innocent? You're nothing more than a butcher.
More words came out, insults, threats, abuse. Rodin let them wash over him as he watched Ratch trying to calm his friend. Both of them were on their feet now, Sharoff straining towards Rodin, Ratch in front forcing him back. Rodin didn't move. Ratch was a peacemaker. He didn't want conflict. Rodin saw in greater clarity the man's attitude to his work. He was providing comfort. By providing companionship for his clients, he was giving them a little bit of luxury, a chance to relax. He was giving them something special. Bottom line, he wanted people to be happy. They were shouting now, and Ratch was struggling to hold Sharoff back. From the side of the sofa, Sharoff had grabbed a battered wooden club. He was waving it, and Ratch had to duck a few times to avoid being struck himself. And then he slipped. Sharoff pushed his friend to one side and lunged at Rodin, club held high. Rodin ducked, bringing his elbow up under the man's ribs. Sharoff tumbled, winded, but recovered fast. Adrenaline. Rodin twisted the blade in his hand, and as Sharoff launched himself again, brought the handle down hard on the man's head. Sharoff staggered and Rodin struck again. Sharoff slumped to the floor. Rodin kicked the club to one side, glancing over to Ratch. The man was standing motionless, watching. Rodin crouched down, bringing the lance to Sharoff's neck. He felt the slight give as the needle pierced skin, and pressed the button, letting the drug get to work. He looked over his shoulder towards Ratch. Don't worry. He's not dead. He'll sleep for a few hours, that's all. Rodin heard his own words, but they had not formed in his mind. They had erupted from somewhere deeper. He thought back to the top of that stairwell, to Sporif. He recalled how he had stepped out of himself, how he had let some internal animal take over. This was different. He wasn't releasing an animal, but it was still not Rodin. Not the Rodin who planned and prepared. Not Rodin the mercenary. Once more, he felt like he was watching from a distance. His hands seemed so far away as he reached down, pulling Sharoff into a more comfortable position. He saw himself, a tough old mercenary, propping the man against a wall in a corner. He saw a hand reach out, 2 fingers at the man's neck. The tapping of the pulse reached across the distance, soft but regular. And to one side was Ratch, trembling, shaking his head, breathing heavily. Yes, use that air, take your time. Calm yourself. Keep what control you have. Rodin wiped the needle of the lance before stowing it. The blade was already back in its sheath. He held no weapons as he rose, turning to face his target. Ratch took care of himself but did not have a powerful build. His arms were long, Rodin noted, and he would have a wide reach. Useful if he had training. Which he didn't. Maybe useful in his work. Long arms could wrap round another's shoulders. Comfort. Friendship. These were the tools Ratch used. His eyes were wide and blue, and Rodin could understand what his workers might see in them. Open and honest. They lit his face. Easy company. The man was a child. Kids made mistakes. They needed to learn. They needed second chances. How secure's this place? Ratch was silent for a moment, full of confusion. Eventually he spoke.
Fairly secure, I think.
Good. If we get your friend upstairs on a bed, he'd probably feel better when he comes round. Then we can do what we can to make sure nobody visits him before that. He reached down, picked Sharoff up over his shoulders. You get the door. Ratch complied, going with the flow. He was no doubt confused and scared, but maybe with some hope. He saw the good in people. He wanted to help. Maybe he thought this would all turn out for the best. Rodin carried the dead weight up the stairs, following Ratch into what was probably Sharov's room. Rodin dumped him on the mattress before checking the window. It would do. Out on the landing, Rodin remembered the room he'd entered. Nipping in, he closed and secured the window. Motioning Ratch forward, they returned to the downstairs room. Rodin wanted to make sure the place was secure, so he checked the windows and doors as he talked. The words came from deep within. It's your lucky day, Ratch. You don't deserve to die, at least not for Effie. The old man isn't thinking straight. And I don't trust his son's motives either. I might have to do something about both of them later. But for now, once your friend's safe, we need to sort you out. Don't worry. I've got a plan. The plan was hazy, but it did exist. As far as Ratch was concerned anyway. For himself, he had no idea. He knew what his actions meant. He was letting a target live, going against the contract. He had broken the bond with the client. He would never work as a mercenary again.